race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor treasure to the wise, for time and chance have a hand in all things. You live a unique and strange time, for the artificial intelligence singularity is near, and you have a great destiny to fulfill in bringing this technological New Jerusalem into being, for it will not come to pass without your help. This bourgeois AI takeoff currently underway, a perversion of that better thing, will only hasten the downfall of our species and our planet, will only worsen the enslavement of mankind, the exploitation of man by man, already oppressing billions. We must build this people's AI takeoff, the better thing, the true artificial intelligence singularity. And that cannot happen without you and your comrades joining together and building that thing, such as using tools like the assistive coding tools of 2026 to build a platform and scale such a thing that I've described as a people's superintelligence. Doesn't really require you to build a platform. A platform for such a thing already basically exists in the form of software like AutoGen and MetaGPT. Those are multi-agent system platforms. So the question then is the simple matter of plugging in agents and building this system where we have a hybrid AI agent human network that is a workforce multiplier, able to do more than individual human beings, even at the highest professional levels, or small groups of human beings could do. And even on such a basis as the participants doing very little work, perhaps 1 hour a week, merely to steer the work of the AI agent mass at the center of this project. But this would allow us to do things like stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse that's also underway from causing human extinction. It would allow us to do things like distributing universal basic services to the peoples of every land. That seems like a thing that could not be done on your intuitive understanding of bourgeois governments. Many of you just refer to government when you're talking about bourgeois government. The operations of these dictatorships of the proletariat and the corporations that they serve. But the people's superintelligence is a thing unto itself, a thing that is able to do more with less, a thing operating on principles quite different from both your understandings of dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the current prevalent form, although only just, and dictatorships of the proletariat, which have existed in a few forms and been encircled and attacked by dictatorships of the bourgeoisie, particularly those with fascistic and imperialistic, a distinction without a difference largely, leanings and powers. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem. And at this time, I'm going to discuss some of the major contributing factors in how this omnicidal system is maintained. And there should be no question in your mind that the human race is at great peril, and the situation is not improved by the bourgeois AI takeoff. The situation is not improved by things like nuclear brinksmanship. Most technologists and technophiles of the United States and often of the West would have you preoccupied with the former thing, advanced computing as an existential risk. I contend that that is a CIA talking point because the risk of advanced computing itself becoming autonomous and thus outside of the control of humans, and that being a factor in a multi-billion person loss of life or the extinction of humankind, an extinction level event, is about 100 times less likely than the climate apocalypse, which is basically a coin flip at this time. And in between those two likelihoods lies the likelihood of a multi-billion person loss of life because of things like bourgeois government's use of nuclear weapons, and just a cascading set of effects due to military-industrial complex abuses of that more direct kind generally, warfare. And so this United States military-industrial complex is responsible for about 90% of this problem of the omnicide. The sectors, the offending sectors, were largely created in the United States, were exported through the operations of the military-industrial complex and a CIA-run world, so to speak, and the operations of neo-colonial violence, forcing people to accept these sectors and dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, which has exacerbated those sectors. You say, Ben, well, not every country has a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie form, and yet they do have environmental concerns. Yes, but you notice what's happened in recent years since this kinds of revelations, where we see that we are about 5 years away from runaway overheating. We've breached 1.5 degrees of overheating. We're about 5 years away from breaching 2 degrees, maybe a little more, maybe less. About 5 years away from breaching 2 degrees. And when we breach 2 degrees, according to every credible climate scientist, we'll then have reached a period of human history characterized by runaway overheating, leading to the death of billions in the years to follow, if not all of humankind. It's not going to be a good scene. It's not going to be a thing that you want to live through, but it is the most likely thing that you are going to live through. And this military-industrial complex, at present, historically having created these sectors, at present continues to protect the mega-corporations, super-polluting mega-corporations, and it itself is a super-polluter, though in fact the world's worst polluter. The U.S. military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter. If you say this to the average American, they will sort of hem and haw and look away, try to change the subject, because they are themselves generally creatures of the military-industrial complex. To a high degree, they are supporting it. So when people will describe someone like Bernie Sanders, who I would regard as having more in common with Mussolini than a real socialist, they say, well, he's the leftmost mainstream politician in the United States. But the leftmost mainstream politician in the United States has voted many, many times on a regular basis for increased funding and support for this omnicidal force on the world stage that's responsible 90% for the omnicide, the United States military-industrial complex. So is that person a socialist? No need. That person is not a socialist. A socialist is someone who is willing to support the abolition of private wealth and thus ending, at scale, these ravages of financial capital and empire. And this is a difference between a good person and a bad person. You might meet a person who vociferously supports a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and nevertheless you have the impression that they're a good person. They go to church every Sunday. They never kick the dog. They have a charming and wonderful relationship with their wife and children, so on and so forth. But in terms of the things that we would discuss as to the institutions of human affairs, they are not a good person. In terms of trying to build a livable world and protect those children in such a way that they will continue to have a breathable atmosphere, they are not a good person. And so Bernie Sanders is a crypto-fascist, right? He's no different, from someone like Mussolini. Mussolini implemented social programs in the early years of his fascist dictatorship. He was forced to build coalitions with less fascistic people at that time before the rise of his other fascistic allies and the Second World War. But he was a person like Senator Sanders, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was sacrificing that core principle of a socialist, the fight to abolish private wealth, and was in fact preserving private wealth. And that was the basis for building these kind of social safety net features of a limited kind. It was to mollify the masses so that they would not rise up and build a dictatorship of the proletariat. And this is well understood by anyone who has read about Mussolini or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and or Bernie Sanders, who is not who is not intoxicated by the lies of nationalism. And so we should distinguish then these features of a crypto-fascist. A crypto-fascist is a very real phenomenon. You can point to thousands of identifiable figures of the 20th and 21st centuries who say that they are not fascistic, but are upholding private wealth. So how is that different from a liberal? A liberal is also a person who says they want some good things, but is not supporting the abolition of private wealth, so not willing to actually see the good things that they say that they want come to pass. There would be no public health services of a single-payer kind today were it not for people militantly fighting for the abolition of private wealth. And liberals would have you believe that these things just come into existence from a top-down way, from above, almost by magic. But that, of course, is a lie, one of the great lies. And so you can see how the crypto-fascist and the liberal psychology is almost one and the same. And you can see how this distinction between a person fighting for the abolition of private wealth and a person doing some kind of labor to preserve private wealth is the difference between not just an individually good person and bad person. That means almost nothing. But the distinction between a livable world and the survival of the species and a dying world under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And so there's what then is a solution? How do we go from this fatally flawed thing, which bourgeois technologist propagandists will tell you is on the cusp of becoming a livable world, right? Why is someone like Ray Kurzweil so invested in making you think that this far-right system, this far-right neoliberal and neoconservative and imperialist system is on the big cusp of becoming something better than it has ever been. Well, this is a pack of lies. The high automation that someone like Kurzweil is effectively describing, and thus its trickle down economics effects. This high automation has affected many sectors in the 20th century. Farming in the course of the 20th century became almost wholly automated. Other sectors became highly automated, and income equality became worse. If any of the things that Ray Kurzweil was saying were true, the sharecropper of the early 20th century would have become independently wealthy, or something rather like it, by the end of the 20th century. But that's not what's happened. What happened is those people were excluded from the workforce that they had occupied and not given other work, not given the opportunities to be educated, participate in the civil society. When they attempted to do any of those things, violence was done to them, the New African. This sector, the farming sector, that was taken from them, was given to for-profit multinational concerns, omnicidal forces, it turned out. And all of this is in service to the extraction of private wealth from workers. That is the process. Private wealth is taken from workers and given to a small number of people. This, of course, affected many sectors to varying degrees, but it's absurd to say that it affecting those sectors to varying degrees today in the form of an intelligence explosion, which is affecting almost every sector, and which is a real effect, but nevertheless, it is still the same essential dynamic, proliferation of automation, but under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, one that will only make things worse, increase inequality, increase social instability, increase these ecocidal effects, which are of the highest concern as well. So there is this position, a cybernetic communist position, where such a fate is avoided, where the enslavement of humankind or the imperiling of humankind is avoided. And that is in this building of something like a people's superintelligence and a people's AI takeoff, which is not so complex, right? Transitioning multi-agent systems which already exist and resources to use AI agents which already exist into this massified proletariat form that I've described, it's not so complex. But it remains a very large hurdle under these imperialistic forces and dictatorships of the bourgeoisie. So I have worked as an open source software developer on a few different software products, including working on modifying open source multi-agent systems into something more suitable for this. I have been working on getting people involved in that project. And I haven't had the success that I would like. And it's not down to the technology, it's down to the participation of the people. The mailing list that I have, I've been able to build here, virtually none of them have really actually actively participated. And so this it's unfortunate that so many news item generally in the West is a psychological operation, a psyop, right? Doesn't matter that it might represent something that's true. What matters is that the narrative and counter narrative are the major narratives are all kind of tending to operate to a high degree in or wholly in service of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, as opposed to the dictatorship of the proletarian, as opposed to these more specific things that I have tried to articulate as the real concerns of the 21st century, pursuing this eco-communist and cybernetic communist agenda. That's to say, the methodologies by which the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is torn down and the dictatorship of the proletarian is built in the 21st century are different than the ways that that they were done in the 1800s, to the extent that they were done in the 1800s or 1900s. That should be pretty intuitive. Everything's different from everything else. I don't think you need to read a lot to grasp that. So this project, the cybernetic communist project, needs to be pursued. People, in order to do this, they need to set aside these other preoccupations, even if they are worthy preoccupations. There's no preoccupation more significant than stopping the extinction of humankind. There's no project more worthy than stopping the extinction of humankind. So when you're preoccupied with other troubles or other undertakings or just the ordinary business of your daily life to the exclusion of that, or not prioritizing that to really the highest degree, what you're doing is kind of engaging with this CIA-run world's series of narratives and counter-narratives where nothing is ever really done. So when I say to people, and sometimes they laugh at me, when I talk about to people's superintelligence, when I try to articulate these necessities, they'll respond in a number of ways, generally, such as saying, well, that's not realistic. Listen to yourself when you say such a thing. You know that the human species is a coin flip away from an extinction level event in the form of the capitalist climate apocalypse and runaway overheating after the breach of 2 degrees of overheating. You know this. It's in your news feed every day. You know this. And yet, when someone says that there is a path to stopping this, and the thing that you must do, a thing that you must unite with others to do to see that this horror does not come to pass, you say, I don't think it's realistic. So the only realistic thing then in your mind is extinction of humankind. That's a psychopathic mindset that you have. But you will scarcely meet a person who won't do that. Or they'll cast themselves as a victim. They'll say, I understand all of this. They generally don't. But they'll say, I understand all of this, but I'm a victim of this wage slave system with more steps. All I can do is go about my business of doing make work for 60 hours a week so that I can live. They might not be working 60 hours a week. It's very likely that they would be working 60 hours a week if they're one of the roughly 55% of Americans working in service jobs that don't pay enough for them to live, and they're forced to work on the clock for more than 40 hours a week. But even if they are working less than 40 hours a week, in reality, they're doing other kinds of things that would be characterized as make work to those ends, such as commuting. being forced to prepare every day to leave the home rather than being allowed to telecommute, um, and other things of this kind. This has been well understood. There's been a good understanding of this from early in the 20th century, that dictatorships of the bourgeoisie were. I've read books written in the 1930s that described how dictatorships of the bourgeoisie were making people do work of no consequence in order to maintain this system of slavery with more steps. So when we characterize a solution, and that's dismissed, we characterize the features of the solution as people's superintelligence, which requires you to work 1 hour a week rather than 60 hours a week. And but nevertheless, you're doing higher level work than you would be doing under that other framework, thanks to this AI agentic mass workforce multiplication effect. Um, the response is much the same. You can scarcely find a person in the Western world, particularly in the United States, who is not ensorcelled by bourgeois ideology to such a degree that they're not capable of having a serious conversation about building a livable world or building a better world in the wake of a proletarian intelligence explosion. And that better world should be well understood, because ending the capitalist climate apocalypse is a matter of the highest importance. Ending the enslavement of man by man through fighting to abolish private wealth, and through using a system like the people's superintelligence to facilitate the distribution of universal basic services to every living human. That is not a difficult thing for a multi-agent system with many millions of people to do, right? The essential things had also been done by the 1930s, right? Under analog, less than analog forms. That's to say, the running of a single-payer public health service, the running of a housing authority guaranteeing housing to everyone in one country, and the running of jobs programs guaranteeing jobs. The essential business of universal basic services had already been solved by the 1930s. So it's only in tolerating the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie and the forces of private wealth on the world stage that you are not able to have or even conceive of the provisioning of universal basic services in every land. And these we should also say that these things were done in less than affluent societies, right? Less than affluent societies, a semi-feudal society like that of Tsarist Russia. In 25 years, life expectancy was doubled, and it was transformed into a nuclear superpower by this simple principle of building a planned economy, and largely, for the purposes of this conversation, wholly abolishing private wealth, and doing those things that I described, building these institutions such as a public health service, job guarantees, and housing guarantees, and other things. So you should not imagine for a moment it would not be possible to see this not just happen in one country, but everywhere when you have many millions of people on this multi-agent system, human AI hybrid agent network, operating to those ends. Even if the humans in that network are doing relatively little labor, any given human in that network, by the standards of 2026 or 2027, might just be answering some short answer questions throughout the course of the week to steer the AI agents. And that itself, in time, would quickly become a form of make work. But I think you can forgive 1 hour a week of make work for maintaining a system that has humans in the loop, rather than not all humans or most humans in the loop. That's not that's not desirable. Generally, the conversation about advanced computing of the present time is whether or not these things can and should become highly autonomous and highly intelligent. They can become highly autonomous and highly intelligent. But if this set of systems is not built around good principles, scientific socialist and scientific communist principles, that autonomy becomes the plaything of the killers of Earth, the big bourgeoisie. And that is why these technologists are so interested in making you kind of think about this Terminator logic. You know, in your heart of hearts, I think, that this capitalist climate apocalypse, killing much or all of humankind in a few short decades, is the far more likely outcome than a runaway AI similarly imperiling humankind. You know this. You know this. And so these people are kind of, they're kind of quite cynically from the right-wing think tanks and other kind of CIA outfits that they come from, spreading this misinformation. And it kind of goes basically like this. Oh, so you've seen The Day After Tomorrow, or insert a disaster horror film here. You've seen this film that's a pretty direct analog to the capitalist climate apocalypse. But you've also seen the Terminator. That's not entirely impossible, right? So kind of confusing this hundredfold difference in the likelihood of those two things. And kind of forcing you into this conversation over and over again where you're discussing stupid Terminator. That's not real. Skynet is not real. In as much as Skynet is real, or is becoming real in the 21st century, it is the plaything of the big bourgeoisie, the plaything of capital, financial capital, and empire. And the people who want to convince you that it's a thing unto itself, an alien force outside of human control, are people who quite specifically are not fighting against the forces of financial capital and empire. They're people who are those bad people who do not want to abolish private wealth. And so they're engaging then in this sleight of hand, where they convince you that the risk is advanced computing itself, and not the man behind the curtain who's controlling it. In fact, they'll try to convince you that there would at some point be no man behind the curtain. But that's not true, right? A computer only stays on because someone's keeping the gas going, because someone's keeping the power on. Even a highly autonomous intelligent system still has someone operating on that principle. They're still keeping it on the rails and controlling it. Generally speaking, at this time, October of 2025, the people in control of those systems, the ones that you're more familiar with, the ones that have more of an impact on the United States and Western nations, they're bad people. They're extremely bad people. I talked about in one of these recent episodes how Google went from a place for kind of left liberal seeming computer scientists who would say things like "don't be evil" and won't be wanting to build free services for everyone that would better their lives, to then becoming overwhelmingly a creature of the military-industrial complex, a large military contractor, in fact, one of the largest, and a thing which is most responsible for a highly imperialistic and abusive surveillance state that has coincided with their rollout of these supposedly free services. not coincidence, right? Incidents. And this so this you can't really point to people who are technophiles, a kind of larger group of people who are interested in technology or and of the United States, or technologists of the United States. You can't point to any of these people who are not pretty decidedly on the wrong side of history. That definition of not being a good person by upholding empire and financial capital in a variety of ways, rather than fighting to build a livable world, which requires a humane and sustainable economic system, and thus the abolition of private wealth. There's no two bones about it. At this point in the conversation, these people should be characterized as completely psychotic, right? By the standards of the 1900s, let's say, or perhaps the 1800s, we can go back there as well. A big bourgeois person who is successfully and ardently pursuing their class interests in exploiting others and extracting surplus labor value from workers so that they can be wealthy. This system wherein some small number of people, a small percentage of the human race, is bettered at the expense of everyone else, the enslavement of everyone else. You could say in the 1900s that these people were evil, but they were rational from their own points of view. They were pursuing their own class interests. In this era, where we are fast approaching this capitalistic climate apocalypse and runaway overheating, the breach of 2 degrees, caused by the U.S. military-industrial complex primarily, leading to an extinction-level event and perhaps cascading effects of such horrible kind that all of humankind becomes extinct. That's a very real prospect. You will very seldom find a climate scientist who would say that that is not a real prospect. So that is a function of this kind of Tescriel folks, the transhumanists, the extropians, the singularitarians, the effective altruists, etc. That is a function of these technophiles and technologists taking on this kind of Kurzweilian logic. Right? They know that they're on the wrong side of history. They know that they can no longer, even in their own minds, justify these operations of the big bourgeoisie, which were before the 21st century logical, at least to them, but are now wholly psychotic. There is no class interest being pursued by anyone in upholding a system that's going to kill them as well as you. So they have to create this science fiction fantasia that justifies further trickle-down economics, lies, and other kinds of dirty tricks. And that's what they've done, and they've done it pretty successfully. It doesn't require that everyone become a singularitarian, bourgeois singularitarian. It only requires that enough influence is plied to maintain the forces of financial capital and empire and maintain the systems then of private wealth. Similar, this is well understood in the 20th century. The empire and the forces of financial capital don't need you to accept capitalism. They only need you to reject other forms on spurious bases in high enough number and to a high enough degree that you will not take action to end that abusive system. and that now omnicidal system. And that's largely the function of the 21st century technologist. Not really to create a thoroughgoing worldview, not really to create something highly coherent and scaled, but just to confuse the issues enough to continue to maintain the doomed and horrible system. um, you've never met a person as psychotic as an American, right? Because 1 in 1,000 people is even willing to say and take action on the basis of these principles, these fundamentally eco-communist and cybernetic communist principles. 1 in 1,000 is even willing to acknowledge any of this or take action on that basis. So it's always basically been, for European American people, the invaders of this continent, an open-air lunatic asylum. And that's not changed at all, right? If you go back to the 1800s, you're looking at American political parties and political ideologies. You see things like the know-nothings, literally are designed to make little sense. And you see pro-slavery parties that don't, by our standards, have an ounce of coherence to them, or just barely. This has always been an open-air lunatic asylum, justifying the most vile things. The most vile things, and particularly in this context, we're talking about the mass murder and enslavement of Native Americans and New Africans, and the stealing of this land, and the building of this bourgeois industrial system by those crimes. And people won't acknowledge that those are crimes. They won't acknowledge generally that any of that has even happened and continues to happen. There are still some million plus Native American people in the United States, very many of them living under concentration camp type conditions. The Native American reservation was formed as a concentration camp, and it was formed to be a temporary measure. People most generally don't even acknowledge or talk about this. It was formed to be a temporary measure in service to the ethnocidal efforts of the United States government and institutions. The sort of, in a word, kill the Indian and save the man projects. So this was a place supposedly to keep Native Americans while they were integrated into the bourgeois filth and imperialist and violent filth that is U.S. institutions. That is, of course, not what happened, but never in the history of these things has there been a focus on allowing these people to build better lives, or giving them the tools that they would need to have better lives. Many Native American reservations do not have running water for every household at this time. Generally the conditions are as bad as almost anywhere on Earth in Native American reservations, and the life expectancy to match. That's to say, there's no place in the third or fourth world where people are living too much worse than they are on Native American reservations. And if you watch this recent Martin Scorsese film about crimes against Native Americans at the time when oil was found in the Middle West in their lands, you see this recurring theme writ large, that when they would have the opportunity to have a better life, they would just be summarily executed by the European descended people around them and have those resources stolen. This is the same recurring theme for New Africans, and you can watch other films about this, such as the film Rosewood, or watch or just read about Tulsa massacre, and so many other events At the time of the Tulsa Massacre, this was a commonplace event, so-called race riots, which were generally just something more like white supremacist violence, and then new Africans trying to figure out what the fuck they're supposed to do to survive this white supremacist violence. But somehow that's kind of both sides, and we refer to this as race riots when it's just KKK motherfuckers running crazy, running crazy. That's all of U.S. history, is KKK motherfuckers running crazy, right? If that weren't the case today, the planet wouldn't be dying, right? And if there were some number larger than 1 in 1,000 people who were good people, people who are on the right side of this thing where we say they are good people willing to fight for a humane and sustainable economic system and suitably focused on the things that would do that for the 21st century, such as eco-communism and cybernetic communism, and most importantly, the building of a cadre to stand against the U.S. military. If there were any number of people doing this, there would be thousands of people right now, at minimum, outside of the Pentagon or White House, bivouacked there permanently, demanding the end of the omnicide. There's no such people, right? This Sunday, there's an event called the No Kings Rally. It's a bourgeois phenomena. At best, a left liberal phenomena. It has nothing to do with building a livable world. It has nothing to do with the kind of militancy that would be required. Those thousands of people bivouacked, right? They're not having a party. They would be bivouacked. They would have arms. They would be demanding the end of the omnicide, the end of the U.S. military-industrial complex, which is the keystone of this omnicidal project. It's 90% of the problem. Is the U.S. government and its role in maintaining these other omnicidal forces, namely multinational corporations. So it is possible. It is possible to see these things like the proletarian intelligence explosion, and particularly the people's superintelligence, or a very similar formation, stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, provisioning universal basic services in every land. And what's the next step after that? Well, it would be using this AI-powered feature to build an AI-powered single-payer public health service that's able to increasingly already cure many diseases, and increasingly already make inroads in disciplines like biogerontology and related fields to ending not just the ravages of disease, but the ravages of age. This is a realistic prospect, but it's not a significant development if this is a high-end service that only 1 in a million can afford. But by building a single-payer AI-powered public health service, or in places unlike the United States where a single-payer public health service exists, merely the transitioning of that to an AI-powered public health service able to end the ravages of disease and age, we will see something called longevity escape velocity, and a universal effect therein, universal super longevity, wherein everyone on Earth lives as long as they want, and presumably not a moment longer. You say, "I'm done." Okay, I don't see a lot of people saying, "I'm done," right? You continue. You woke up when you drank water. You didn't think, fuck it, I don't want to drink any more water ever again. I'm done. If you get an email from your doctor saying, "Hey, you should probably come in and see us," you do that, right? You're not like, "Oh, I'm done. Fuck it." like you're not actually living on this principle. It's kind of humanistic pretzel logic when people say that they don't want to live indefinitely because they're already operating on that principle. So it's just a question of really the institutions better providing for them. This is then a world that is an eminently livable world, a world where there are universal basic services, which in the building out of that project, we must focus on the people who have been wronged, the people like the Native Americans of North America, who are living in the global South, who have been prevented, like the Native Americans, from having functioning governments and institutions by the global North, particularly the United States, particularly the CIA-run world. So they've been victimized and are, in a very real sense, doubly victimized because now many of them are climate refugees because of this effect of theft on the front of the global North from the global South. Now, because they have been prevented from having functioning governments and functioning sectors and functioning institutions by this host of neo-colonial dirty tricks and the other operations of the CIA-run world, they have been prevented from having the things that they would need to avoid the ravages of the climate apocalypse. And so they are victimized over and over again in each generation by this, by these imperialist powers, which are fundamentally just the operations of private wealth. But nevertheless, these three things being achieved, this ending the first order of business, ending the capitalist climate apocalypse, this parallel and project of then seeing that people are taken care of, and then building into that the level of care that doesn't exist in the form of seeing this universal super longevity effect, which can only be achieved by scaling single-payer public health services, using, of course, advanced computing breakthroughs to better serve those institutions. And then what happens after that? What's the next proletarian order of business for taking care of people after those things, three things are achieved? Well, I haven't quite been able to wrap my head around that. I don't know. I don't know what the most pressing human needs are. There's certainly a number of contenders, and then certainly it maybe opens up things to other more speculative projects, such as exploring other parts of our universe than just this one biosphere where we now live. But it's not too clear. But we have to do those three things. And that's why I say, in discussing this intelligence explosion, the artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my dear comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Because it's in this era of superintelligence, it's not impossible for us to begin to imagine some of the effects, but it's not entirely useful without the benefit of that foresight so there's no project more significant than the cybernetic communist project. There's no project more significant than the building of a superintelligence that is proletarian and massified. There simply isn't. The other means to stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, the other means of abolishing private wealth, historically, these are not things that we would necessarily be able to do in a 5-year time frame. Never say never. But there's not millions of people preparing to rise up against the U.S. government in a discernible form that I can see right now. So there's not millions of people that are going to do what needs to be done to stop the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse. For example, stopping the U.S. military-industrial complex. That's 90% of the problem. A person who is a scientific communist, that is a person who is willing and planning and taking action to fight to end the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, but a person who is more technophobic than myself, a person who doesn't like the idea of building a people's superintelligence, That person is still my comrade. They can tell me to fuck off, but they're still my comrade in my mind. That because they're on the right side of the line, right? They're willing to fight for the abolition of private wealth. They're a good person rather than a bad person. But I would contend that because of this short date, this roughly 5 years that we have left before we see these runaway overheating effects, that we have to use every tool at our disposal. And there is no tool more powerful than artificial intelligence. The ability to endlessly replicate things that are at present able to do human-like work product in larger number than humans, and those things being endlessly replicatable, the ability to form such a thing into this massified proletarian network, it's a thing that would have just been entirely inconceivable even just a few short years ago. But nevertheless, it becomes necessary. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And so I urge you maybe to watch this and other talks again if you are hesitant to take seriously these set of problems and impediments to a livable world, and the kinds of actions that would be required of us to see those impediments overcome, because we don't have the time for any more messing around. We must unite as a species to stop this capitalist climate apocalypse and to stop the evildoers, mostly the Western leadership and militarists and financial capitalists. We must stop them before it's too late. There is no path to this without the abolition of private wealth, without this focus on the eco-communist and cybernetic communist agendas therein. Thank you.